Welcome to Blueprint to Billions, Leverage and Legacy in Apartments.
Welcome back to Season 2 of Blueprint to Billions, where legal strategy meets real estate scale. HUD attorney and multifamily housing strategist Terry Bruner has spent his career guiding developers, nonprofits, and investors through complex housing transactions with a focus on building both legacy and leverage. I'm Evan Mack, and we've covered the what and the how. Now it's time to talk about the multiplier effect. In today's episode, Terry will explain what HUD and TPA transactions are unique and how one deal can ripple across generations and why relationship capital matters as much as money in these projects. This is the Real Estate Multiplier. Terry, sir, welcome back.
Hey, welcome to me, and thank you for having me.
Listen, I like to see you. Listen to different outfits, different episodes. You know what I mean.
Another day, another dollar, I guess.
Another day, another dollar, as they say. Terry, sir, we've talked about the what, we talked about the how. Let's get a little more specific. Why is real estate for the multiplier for generational wealth?
Well, again, I think when you think about what real estate entails and the fact that, I've said this before, they're not building any more dirt. The fact that real estate is an asset that appreciates generally over multiple years, it's different than other asset classes. Not only does it appreciate, but it's something that could potentially stay, as a stable investment for, upwards of 60 plus years. That's just different than, for as great as the stock market is, and it's wonderful because, again, I'm invested in the market too, but typically people don't have stock for 60 years.
Right.
It just doesn't happen that way. And so if you are relatively risk averse, real estate is a great way to hedge against some of that risk because it tends to be a longer term, more stable environment, stable investment. And as a result of it being longer term and more stable, it does have the potential of being something that's in a family for generations. I've heard stories for many years, particularly in the Hasidic Jew community of New York, where grandfathers and great grandfathers would purchase buildings, like co-op buildings or just apartment buildings in New York, back in the early 1900s and elsewhere, and they would use that as a wealth investment tool for generations, to the point where when their grandchildren, or in some cases their great grandchildren, were married, they had money to give them for their first houses, or when their kids were first born, they had money to set up, college funds for their grandchildren and such as that. And that's not unique to to that community in New York, but I'm just using that as an example of how you can see that multiplier actually taking effect.
So for listeners who don't live in your world, what's unique about the HUD and the TPA deals compared to maybe other real estate opportunities?
Well, let's just start with the basics. The deals that we work with at HUD, they are not necessarily, affordable housing deals. Many of them are conventional market rate loans. They just happen to carry a backing from the federal government. The great deal for any of these transactions is that it's a long-term loan. So it's generally a 35-year loan that has no personal recourse to it, meaning generally you have no personal liability to it. It can go up to upwards of 40 years if you actually construct the building, and then it converts over to a permanent loan. So usually when you build something, you have to go get a construction loan, which is difficult to get sometimes, depending on who you are and what your history is. And then once it's built, you've got to refinance that into a permanent loan that will, essentially carry the debt for the next, 20, 30 years. With the HUD program, it's all rolled into one. So you make one application, you get a loan to build the building, and then once it's built, it converts over to a permanent loan. The great thing, and this is kind of like our bailiwick, it's fully assumable, fully assignable. Meaning, so Evan builds something with HUD and he gets it built, and then 2 years after he gets it built, he wants to sell it. There's no restriction on it. There's generally no prepayment on it, as long as the person or the entity that's buying it is willing to assume the note. And then HUD goes and approves that. And so even the next person who didn't build it but who acquired it, they've got a runway of 30 plus years of relatively stable government money, a lot of times fairly cheap money. So that is even fundamentally different than what we find in most multifamily contexts. So you take the combination of no personal liability, long term, it goes from a construction to a permanent loan, and you've got a note that you can fully assign to someone else, assuming they get approved. It's a no-brainer how valuable it is.
Can you break down how one successful HUD deal can impact maybe three generations at once?
I'm going to generalize, but it's based on a real client.
Right.
Um, um, Grandma and grandpa buy a couple of properties that have government money on them in some ways. One was actually a subsidized property. Another is actually one that they assigned through or purchased through what's called a TPA, as we've talked about on this show.
Yep.
They then get it, and they then assign. I shouldn't say assign. They give essentially both of those buildings, one to one sibling or one child, the other to another child, and they then use those two assets. So let's say sister gets asset A, brother gets asset B. Then brother and sister get married, and then with their husband and wife, they then purchase something else, and along the HUD spectrum. And so now what was two has become four. Maybe it becomes eight. Maybe it becomes 16. All carrying all of those attributes that we talked about in the HUD program before. And so literally now they are financing a lot of their children or funding a lot of their children's lives through the acquisition of these two initial properties. It's a cascade effect. And if you do it
Mhm.
right, that is the multiplier that we're talking about.
So what about the ripple effect? How does one project affect not just an investor, but a neighborhood or even a community?
Well, if you build something that the neighborhood doesn't like, then obviously it negatively impacts the neighborhood.
Yeah.
But let's say, for example, you're trying to transform a neighborhood, and you have a situation where what was once a ton of blighted office buildings, or maybe dilapidated homes, and you have developers who come in and want to build really nice apartments that will attract not only a younger generation but maybe a group of empty nesters who come in. Typically what follows from the real estate, from the residential real estate, typically what follows would then be things like retail and with entertainment and all of the other things that really kind of make a community worth living in. But in most instances, it starts with being able to have people in the space who are actually going to support those other things. So when you talk about, ripple effects, if developers are really, really good and smart about what they're doing, if they start building residential units and residential housing in places, and by residential, I mean both single and multifamily, if they start doing that, then over time, depending on who's moving in, you'll start to see grocery stores, movie theaters, restaurants, bars, all those kinds of things. And so then this fictional neighborhood that was once dilapidated, now it's come to life again. And you've got a wonderful place where people want to hang out and where they want to do all sorts of neat things that maybe didn't happen, 5 or 10 years before the developer came in.
It seems like an outdated concept nowadays, but what role does patience play in real estate wealth building?
Patience? Does that still exist?
I wonder sometimes.
No, it plays more than you can think, and more than what most people think. Obviously, when you deal with the federal government, you're getting a lot of benefits, but you're also getting a lot of headaches too. So clients will sometimes say to me, "Hey, I think the HUD program or the HUD programs are great, but it's going to add like 3 months to my timeline. I don't have 3 months to spare." And I said, "Well, that may be true on some instances, but who's to say you're not going to burn those 3 months with the local planning board or the local municipality asking you for permitting or other things that you didn't anticipate? Those things aren't going to go away simply because you're not doing a HUD transaction." But
Hmm.
I think the notion that somehow we can get things done quickly, fast, efficiently, and without any stumbling blocks, it's always been a little bit of a misnomer. Now, we obviously are invested from our standpoint of getting deals done and getting them done efficiently and as quickly as possible. But that all is balanced with the sense that we still need time. We still need the process to work. And I think this is where, if you balance the longer term with the shorter term inconvenience, the longer term is going to turn out so much better than most people anticipate. But you've got to be willing to let the process sort of play itself out with a little nudging, yes, but understanding that there is a process and it needs to be engaged the right way.
Some people feel that HUD deals are there's complexities to them. What do they misunderstand about that?
To be sure, they are complex. I
Hmm.
always say internally, these are not necessarily complicated deals. Yes, do they have nuance and layers to them? Yes. But at the end of the day, it's really a simple calculus. You want
Mm,
to build something, you want the government's help in building that something, and you need them to say yes to you building that something so you can unlock the resources that they provide.
right.
There is complexity in that. To go to your question, there is complexity in that, which oftentimes revolves around the relationships, the nuances, the people who are involved. Depending on who you get at HUD, they may ask you for 10 different things that someone else who does the very same job might never ask you. And should it be that way? No. But we're dealing with humans. And sometimes humans are stressed. Sometimes humans are stretched. Sometimes humans
Mm,
come in and have a bad day. And as a result of that, dealing with those complexities largely becomes a function of dealing with the people. But that's where the relational and the relationship capital comes in to navigate dealing with those complexities. Because if you've done it enough, if you do it enough, you start to understand that while there are differences, there are a lot of similarities in how you deal with people. It's just knowing how to unlock those things in such a way so you can get it done.
where does relationship capital show up in these deals? Why is it as important as the financial capital?
It's everywhere. That capital is everywhere, and particularly when you're dealing with the government. There is
Okay.
nothing better than knowing who you're working with,
Right.
knowing what those people want, and
Right.
then delivering those things to them. So I'm going to give you
Mm,
an example from usually when we process deals through HUD, there is an assigned case manager of sorts,
mhm.
and that person is typically called an account executive. There is one particular account executive we know we're going to have to hold that person's hand. We know that what we normally would provide and submit to the lion's share of account executives out there, we're going to have to do something different with this one. And so, knowing that, we have taken to really just kind of tilling the soil a little bit, reaching out proactively, kind of alerting that person to what's coming, how we want to structure things, what they're going to see when an application comes forward, and most importantly, kind of what our timeline looks like. Not to put any pressure on them, although we are, softly and subtly saying we need you to move on this like now. But what we're doing is basically trying to enlist them as a partner. They have done enough of our deals and been a part of our work for enough times that when they see us coming now, when we have to interface with this person, there is I won't say a camaraderie, but there is a sense that, hey, they're going to give me what I want. So do you think that lessens the burden in terms of what that person is looking at internally? It absolutely does, because they have the confidence of knowing, hey, we've worked with Terry and his team before.
Right.
Terry and his team know, how this is done. They know what we're looking for. And so that relationship that we've built very consistently over the years, it does have a material impact on how our clients are able to put things through, get things approved, and then move on to what else they want to do. So that relationship capital is always there.
Mm. So for professionals listening, how can building expertise in a niche create the same multiplier effect in their careers?
Well, think about it. So typically the hardest thing to do rather, is doing the thing the first time. Think about riding a bike. You know, it's the hardest thing in the world to figure out how to balance yourself on a bike with no training wheels. But after you fall down and scrape your knee 8 times the first time you get on, then you keep getting back on, and maybe the next time you scrape it 6 times. Maybe the third time you scrape it only 3 times. So with that bending of the curve that happens, you then become just proficient and very good at knowing what it takes to do those kinds of things. As you become more efficient in doing one thing, one part of law, one specific niche of law, that allows you to do more of those things, and
Hmm.
allows you then to have not only nuance in how you do those things, but it allows you to anticipate what's coming down the track for your client in a way that you probably wouldn't know otherwise. And it's that sort of expertise, and it's that sort of experience that over time You multiply that across many, many different transactions and many, many different clients, so that you then start building not only relationship capital, but you actually start building a bevy of expertise that allows you to really boomerang forward in a way that you wouldn't do if you're doing 5, 6, 8, 10 different things.
So you touched on it a bit earlier, but do you have a story where one of these deals turned out to be more than just dollars, but made that real community impact that you were mentioning?
Yeah, I'll go to a project that we actually did with a nonprofit, and the nonprofit had a vision of building basically a center that would be available for for the community, and they took existing land and existing buildings that were essentially unused, and they went out and sought government money to transform how they were able to utilize that space. So they tore down those buildings, they got some government money, they were allowed to build this building, and while it wasn't directly housing in that particular instance, they put things in place in that expanse that does things like workforce development, that actually has a child care component to it, so that people in the community can drop their kids off with child care sometimes while they're getting training in the community or in workforce development. And so all of these things dovetail with many housing providers who are adjacent to this development, who then complement exactly what the nonprofit has been able to do with this center in such a way that now there's a whole community feel where there wasn't that same aspect a few years ago. And that's an example of how, if you partner with the right people and you partner with the right situation, you can actually move the proverbial needle forward, even if you're not just doing housing. But providing housing is more than just an actual place to stay. It's also about building community. And I think we're fortunate here to have been a part of that exercise, so that even some of those housing providers now benefit from the things that the people in the community are able to access by way of the nonprofit.
So Terry, tease us forward. Next up, we're kind of diving into why relationships themselves are the blueprint. What's the one connection that changed the trajectory of a deal that you worked on?
I think there are multiple connections, right? But the one in particular has always been maintaining a very healthy relationship with the powers that be at HUD. And what I mean by that is not necessarily the people who are at the top reaches of the department in Washington, but it's the line attorneys, it's the so-called line account executives and branch chiefs and production people in offices all around the country, in Fort Worth, in Atlanta, in San Francisco, in Denver, having those relationships over time, so that when they see us coming, they trust that while we have a job to do, we're going to be fair about it, and we're going to present it in the right way, so that we're able to best represent our clients' interests while also honoring what the government wants done. It's by far the differentiator in terms of relationships. The things that we've been able to do at HUD is by far the thing that's kept us going and that continues to make us valuable in terms of the work that we do. I wouldn't take anything for those relationships at all.
Amazing. Terry, sir, appreciate the time as always.
Thanks, Evan.
All right. And thank you all for tuning in to Blueprint to Billions. If you're navigating HUD-backed development and want to elevate your credibility from day one, connect with Terry Bruner at terrybrunerlaw.com. And if you're an attorney looking to build a legal practice on your own terms, outside of the big firm pressure and into a niche that actually reflects your values, check out Terry's courses at thenichepractice.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone that might find the information helpful as well. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.